Amal, Yusuf.
Yes, it's bright and beautiful, and we're bright and early as well on this side. Good morning and welcome. I am Bukola Koka.
Well, 10 days gone in July already. I had to play that role. But here in Lagos, it's definitely beautiful. Welcome to the show. I'm Kayode Okikelu.
Okay, now all eyes on me.
Yeah.
Because we started this. Well, I mean, we've said that the day is beautiful, and we sincerely hope that it is beautiful for you, wherever it is that you are. But yesterday, it wasn't so pretty for a number of travelers who were along the Lagos-Badagry expressway. There was a very ghastly motor accident which occurred along the particular road, and it left 15 people dead, including a 4-month-old baby. The accident was reported by the Federal Road Safety Corporation. We had a conversation with one of the officials afterwards, and he said he attributed it to overspeeding. According to him, it was a morning where Lagos was experiencing a downpour. There was a very heavy downpour, and a commercial bus driver was trying to overtake a truck. And apparently there was another truck in front, and somehow it ran into that particular truck. You can see some of the visuals now, some of the victims being evacuated from the bus. A very, very terrible sight to see. We understand that they were able to rescue some people who sustained minor injuries, beg your pardon, serious injuries actually, about 9 of them. A baby who was evacuated, alive, a 4-month-old baby, eventually got to the hospital and lost his life. A very, very, very sad situation there. Now, I know that there are so many scenarios that will come up as to first, these commercial buses, don't we need to have a second look at our commercial buses? At the state of mind of the commercial bus drivers, are we, keeping tabs on just how, ready they are to ferry people? They have lives in their hands that, they put in these buses, and they're supposed to take from one place to the other. Is anybody, ensuring that these people are not abusing substance, are not under the influence of anything? But sometimes you have to ask, how does it make any sense for anyone to be speeding in the rain? Before now, part of the problem of the Lagos-Badagry Expressway used to be the situation of bad roads. But it has improved somewhat. At least we can speak to, certain parts from, at least I know, from Ijaniki up all the way to Badagry. Those parts of the road, at least there is one lane that is now functional, fully functional. So you have to ask questions as to, is it that people are, when the roads are bad, they have accidents? When the roads are good, we still have to keep tabs on how drivers use those roads. But then, you also have to ask how people are conscious of safety. Do people know that they shouldn't be driving, really fast when it's raining heavily? Some people will say it's common sense, but sometimes common sense is not so common. And that's precisely the result of what we saw yesterday. 15 people in one fell swoop. While we talk about insecurity of lives and insecurity across the country, should we also lose lives to matters like safety that could have been prevented in the first place?
Well, Malpe, we really shouldn't be losing lives when it's inevitable. And, Lagos-Badagry Expressway is a scene that I'm familiar with. And, I was going to jump on, that thought about whether it occurred as a result of, the chaotic scene of Lagos-Badagry Expressway until, we had a conversation before the start of the program. And you said, quite a number of that portion, quite some portion of that road has been rehabilitated. So why should this happen? It was really a gory sight to behold, even though we had to, blur some of the images of that accident. Quite a number of people, from experience, are unable to reprimand recalcitrant drivers particularly in public transport, but that shouldn't be the case. So it was disheartening to watch the road safety official who spoke with Channels Television yesterday, to hear him say that the drivers, perhaps the passengers, I beg your pardon, couldn't reprimand the driver, for overspeeding. Where the road is okay, then there really is no need to blame government for, bad portions of road resulting in accidents. We must do better. Particularly, this is also a clarion call now to, those bus transport unions to rein in on their drivers. There was a time that, there was part of training for them was that they would be subjected to some form of alcohol test before they are entrusted with that all-important responsibility of safety of lives. I wonder what's become of that. Perhaps that should be resuscitated.
What you find now is
15 lives.
Yeah, it's so sad. What you find now is actually vendors selling alcohol around the vehicle, the motor parks and the rest. So you wonder, what's the point? If you're meant to submit themselves to some sort of alcohol test and it's just right there in public being sold, I mean, you can add that together.
Perhaps that's the first point of rehabilitation reform.
Indeed, it's really important. We can talk about the actions of drivers, road users, while on the road. But then there's some work that needs to be done before you even get on the road. And I just wanted to touch on that. The rains are here. We all know that. But it's important to do some of these major checks. So you check your tires, because the rains have begun. So when you slam that brake, you know that if your tires just do not have the grips, appropriately, if they are maybe gone, then you know that it can't grip the road very well because it's even wet. So it's important to check your tires. It's your tires, it's for your vehicle, it's for your safety. So check your tires, check your brake pads. It's very important. You may have changed it, who knows, a year ago, 2 years ago, and you just think it will still be good, but it's important to check your brake pads as well. Check your wipers. Okay, because the rains just started in some places, you maybe have not used your wiper for some time, and you just flick it on and you realize this wiper is not working. I was, driving yesterday and I saw a vehicle behind me who had to, was holding a rag. So each time he would wipe the windshield in front of him and then roll up again. It was raining yesterday, and then he would do it time and again. And maybe it wasn't on purpose, but if you check these things before you start driving, then you know, okay, this is wrong. So it's important to do all of these checks before you go out. So you don't try to use your brakes on the road and you realize, oh, it's not working, or your wiper, it's not working, because all of these things add up to what we see. And just to point out that the Lagos-Badagry route also needs a lot of attention. There have been accidents, bike accidents, motor accidents, because of the unruly behavior of road users. And yes, some of these things go unreported. I heard, people dying as a result of bike crashes, perhaps on a weekly basis. But we don't want a bigger, issue on our hands. So it's important for the officials to pay attention to that route as well, guys. And
you're correct, Kayode. An accident occurred on Lagos-Badagry Expressway a few months back, claiming quite a number of lives. But in this case now, as you have said, we really can't. We don't know if we can blame the passengers. So the drivers have to take responsibility for whatever happens now. And it's the rainy season. Visibility is poor. If you stay, if you're in a hurry, you just may never get to your destination. So there is no hurry at all. Speed less and live longer. Guys?
Well, there's just so much, because sometimes when you look at all of these things, the decay in some of these agencies is just mind-boggling, because there's a lot that needs to be done. At least all of these agencies, they've got to pull their weight. They have to perform and carry out their duties, because I say time and again, and because they've actually accosted me and I was able to get that kind of information out from them. Most of these agencies approach the cars that they think can pay the fines. And they say, look, if we approach some of those other cars there, they can't pay any fines. So we don't want to, in the manner of speaking, waste time on those kinds of people. And that's why you see them take laws into their hands, they throw caution to the wind, they do all sorts of things endangering the lives of motorists. And motorists themselves, you just have to look at the kind of vehicle you're entering. Have a little bit of value for your own life. It doesn't take you anything to refuse entering that particular vehicle and wait for the next one. It's better to arrive late than to be referred to as the late. And, you know, speaking about some of the things that also need to be corrected in this country, it was over the weekend as well, some killings in Jos. And you tend to ask yourself, again, are we still grappling with these sort of things? And so if it's still happening at this point in time, then you have to ask yourself questions. Wait a minute. Does it mean that, well, of course, it's deliberate when they go out to carry out these killings in the first place, but what we cannot understand and condone or tolerate is that any DPO where this kind of things happen in your locality and it keeps happening, you don't have intelligence, you can't arrest the people here, I think they should be fired. Because there's absolutely no reason whatsoever to have those kinds of people in those areas and these things are happening. Because we know, they tell us time and again, and sometimes the officials in uniform who you see stopping you on the roads in the early morning, asking a thing or two, are those who have done the night shift, they're about going home, so they do all of that knowing they're not going to return. And they also allege that they make returns to certain persons or DPOs. So all of these things are things that the security agencies, the IGP, the NSA, they cannot condone these kinds of actions because you don't want residents taking laws into their hands, because if that happens, you have a lot more challenge on your hands. And so it's just that, look, we all need to ensure that the right things are done, because no one has a monopoly of violence. If certain other people decide, look, we've had up to here, if you can't protect us, we protect ourselves, then what will we do about all of these things? So look, we just have to step up, show up and show out, and ensure that these things for which they were elected and the security agencies who are paid with taxpayers' funds do what they have to do. All right, so let's go ahead and take you through some of the dailies here today. Okay, let me look at New Telegraph. They're talking about attrition rate in military, worrisome, says retired general. As if we've not had enough worries in this country to grapple with. And then you see this one. Warns Nigeria creating security problems in different ways. Seeks extension of service years. You know, this has been happening for how long now? And people thought that, well, it's the norm. But now you get to hear this. So you could imagine the kinds of impressions several of them might have had for at least this to come forth. Because, look, well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see if we'll find a way to address these kinds of scenarios. Because can we continue in this same way? I don't know. Perhaps your guess might be as good as anybody else's. So there you go. That is what you have here. Account for $5 billion Abacha loot, court orders OBJ, Yaradua, Jonathan, Buhari's governments asks Tinubu to disclose recovered sum. Serap writes president to implement judgment. And so perhaps attention turns on government again in terms of how, whether or not they will respond to court orders. And well, don't forget to hear the next couple of days that they will appeal this, and then who knows, it goes into history books, because we tend to move on quickly from certain things that should define us. Because I mean, not really, it doesn't even matter if you commit a crime now. In 20, 30 years, you should. I often ask myself, look, how many of our security agencies are even still involved in investigation of crimes that's been committed a long time, a while ago, such that it serves as a huge deterrent to several other people? Because in many cases, you just find out, they just move on and say, look, well, look, it's gone with history, and people can do things and go away with it. Who knows? And then Nigeria again, featuring internationally, but this time, Seychelles bans Nigerian passport holders from holiday visits. I think it's about time that who knows, we revisit these kind of things and reposition the image of this country, because there's just so many things that need to change, really. So many. But that's no telegraph this morning, guys.
Okay, so let us take a look at the Abuja Inquirer. I'm trying to focus on what is happening right here in the city. And trade more is still very much on the front page. Why did you look up like that, Timberlake? Trade more is still very much the focus for the Abuja Inquirer.
Oh dear.
You see there, Trademore Estate, FCTA residents battle rages. No estate on Airport Road has land title. That's somebody speaking now. You might want to know who that is on page 3 of the paper. Is that a government official, or is that somebody alleging that indeed no estate on Airport Road has land title? I don't know. You might want to look for details on page 3 of the paper. You have a number of other stories here. French embassy denies Nigerian teen prodigy visa. Okay, so this guy's got great talent, and it does appear that maybe he was supposed to go to France, and the French government is not satisfied, or shall I say the French embassy in Nigeria is not satisfied, maybe, and they have refused him a visa. But here you see the foreign ministry wades in. So like Nigeria is not sitting by and letting that happen. NCAA Air Peace Max Air top list of cancelled flights. That is also on the front page of the paper. We'll leave it there for the Abuja Inquirer.
And flip to Leadership newspaper. It has a number of stories that will also interest you this morning. Let's start with the big one. This is how it is rendered. NAS committees, Akpabio, Abbas under fire for conceding 50% chairs to opposition. There are just a few riders. Deal sealed before June 13 National Assembly election. But that really doesn't come as a surprise, really, considering all of the jostling that took place before the election. This is the second rider. All parliament-friendly bodies to be upgraded to committee level. Well, the leadership of the National Assembly has also been commended for reflecting federal character in the appointment of key positions. So what's this about, in case you're also wondering, as I am? It's a page 4 read.
I'm wondering, what's parliament-friendly bodies?
Well, find out from page 4 of Leadership newspaper. There is this one just above the big story. Naira unification, forex inflow rises by 28% to $1.41 billion. So what does that mean? Does it mean that the Naira will gain against the dollar? Does it mean that, our excess crude account will be stronger for it? I guess we'll be asking all of those questions.
Well, the very interesting point you actually make. So the ECA had been very controversial whether or not there was even anything in it in the first place.
Right?
But I think it was a Bank of America that recently said that the Naira was being undervalued. So I think if that is indeed true, if that is taken into consideration, maybe we might just see an improvement in that dollar to Naira rate. But not forgetting, not just dollar to Naira, you have pounds to Naira as well. So I imagine this will affect all of those exchange rates. But, we'll see in the coming days.
We'll see in the coming days. And, of course, we'll ask those questions for you. 2 more before we exit the Leadership newspaper. Above the nameplate, you find these 2. Tinubu emerges ECOWAS chairman, and it was cheery to see the president encourage, men of the ECOMOG monitoring group, I believe.
The Nigerian
contingent there. And lastly, Ribadu to chair Leadership NDLEA conference on drug abuse. That's the new National Security Advisor. Let's leave it there for Leadership newspaper.
Well, take a look at The Guardian. Very interesting headline there for you, and it's on the ministerial list, all right? 5 ex-governors, technocrats lead Tinubu's 42-man cabinet. So it looks like this is some sort of insight from The Guardian, because we know that, the list is not out yet, and the president had said, well, it's not out, so whatever it is you're hearing out there, it's not from us, okay? It is the president's prerogative to choose his people. So you see a picture, or at least pictures put together of some of these ex-governors. So you wonder, is this a peek or sneak peek into the cabinet
So should we run away with this, or should we proceed with caution?
I know you know the answer to that already.
Well, you make up your mind on that one.
It's page 6, but you understand how these things work. So maybe in the coming days we'll see whether or not these pictures, or at least this headline, is indeed what it will be. But clearly an interesting read, because you heard Governor Fayose saying that Governor Wike must be in President Tinubu's cabinet.
Canvassing for him.
But the big question is, so what are the factors that will come into play in choosing who will serve Nigeria? Because, as they said, Nigeria needs a lot of work right now. A couple of more stories, but you'll understand why that interests us. But we'll leave it there for the Guardian newspaper.
The Vanguard is next. Governments of ex-presidents must account for $5 billion Abacha loot. Federal High Court orders administrations of ex-presidents Obasanjo, Yaradua, Jonathan, Buhari to account for repatriated funds. Sarab urges Tinubu to obey court orders. So that is the big lead on the front page of Vanguard here this morning. Banks in earnings windfall under high interest rate regime. And you wonder, to the expense of what? SMEs, economy, growth of that sector. And then you get to see the riders here, so you might want to check that out yourself. But in the Senate, lobby for juicy committees intensifies in Senate. Are you surprised about that? Because
is there any juice still left?
Oh, you bet. You see the way they struggle, they jostle, they contend for all of these things, and you ask yourself, wait a minute, what's in our... There's way much more in there than you and I can see. But if not, why do they keep doing all of these things? So, yeah, they'll tell us, tighten our belts. Sometimes you even wonder, there's no belly to tighten anymore. All the holes are all tight, but they keep saying, tighten your belts. And then
meanwhile, some people own no belts.
Yeah. And all the holes have been extended, and it's just very, very interesting. But I guess we'll keep tabs on this and see what happens. Benue, death toll in Ukum local government attack hit 30. Governor Alia, APC, condemn bloodbath. In a country such as this, and we still have these kind of stories. And then look at that curfew, as 12 die in fresh attacks on plateau communities. These things cannot continue. It just cannot continue. There are humans who are carrying out these things, and they have to be arrested, whoever they are. After all, the DSS says, if anyone violates the law, we will take them into custody. So please, let the same things apply to these kinds of people. No one should be seen or given the impression that certain people are above the law, because that's the way it's coming across now. Well, just shut all of us up by arresting all of them so that this doesn't happen again. That's Vanguard today.
Well, this Nigeria has this focusing on the southeast now. Sit at home grounds businesses in southeast as gunmen waste lives. It's right there on the front page. Stakeholders count losses, want definite solution. Security agencies intensify move to stop menace. Kill 8 in 1 week, arrest 15 suspects. Well, that story is right on the front page of this Nigeria. They also have a number of other stories there for you. Of course, I think we've seen this in other papers. Tinubu takes over as new ECOWAS chairman, says region must rise against coup d'etat. That's on the front page. And then look at this. Financial crime. Bank customers lose 472 million naira in first quarter 2023, says FITC. What did you say the banks were making just now as windfall from interest rates?
Yeah. I mean, earnings up to 46%, 1.4 trillion. They're even rising faster than loan portfolio.
Well, see how much customers are losing to fraud. So while the banks might be making money, they have to find ways to ensure that customers do not lose their monies to fraudsters.
Sometimes I wonder if they care. Wonder.
Their rate of responsiveness really needs to improve.
It's abysmal, to say the least.
Nowadays, you see people on Twitter, when you start something, maybe a conversation, and you now see somebody just come and say, hey, this bank, I've not seen my refund. You are owing me this amount of money, blah, 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 blah. Or you see this telco, I try to recharge. So they try to put it under conversations. They think that people might quickly be able to take up these conversations from them. Then you might see the telco or the airing bank saying, oh, send us a private message, we will take it up from there.
Yet these banks, these agencies, they all have regulatory bodies.
Yeah.
You know, that's how helpless.
That's how helpless citizens are. Yeah. Really, really sad.
Yeah.
Really, really sad that citizens have to resort to those kinds of tactics to get the attention of the banks or the telcos. Well, let's leave it there for this Nigeria.
And turn to the Daily Trust newspaper, which has an exclusive that would, I'm sure will catch your attention this morning. And this is it. Why local rice price continues to rise, as ascribed to millers and farmers. And some of the writers here seek to answer that question. Blame corruption, inadequate paddy supply, poor irrigation. Seek subsidy from federal government. Tinubu must wade in. That's ascribed to citizens who also spoke to this report. And lastly, we supported 4.57 million farmers, as ascribed to the CBN. So what's the place of this support for, 4.57 million farmers? That's the Anchor's a reference to the Anchor Borrowers program. Yeah. Isn't it supposed to, bring down the price of bags of rice sufficiently?
Well, I don't know if that was part of the terms and conditions. It was just some sort of help to their business. I don't think there was that agreement that, okay, so that means you sell your produce or whatever at a certain price. I'm not sure.
Well, I guess some other factors also contribute. I.e. insecurity, insurgency in states of the federation, where these type of agriculture is supposed to be going on a large scale. And we just trailed the southeast, from the previous paper. Ebonyi is one place where rice is supposed to be produced, large scale. A few more stories going to the bottom of the paper now. 15 bodies recovered, 78 houses burned in Plateau. That's ascribed to Macban. That's sad. What's going on there? And, this is also even more worrying. The next to it, Sokoto butcher killed by Amotekun in Oyo. If you're interested in following up on these stories, they're on the inside pages 7 and 5, respectively. Let's leave it there for Daily Trust.
Well, the Nigerian News Direct leads with the Abacha loot story, and you see pressure mounts on FG to reveal expenditure and total amount looted. And I wonder why it's been, I don't know, will I say difficult to get these details out. It's the Commonwealth of Nigerians, so let us see. Let us know these things. What is standing in the way of transparency and accountability? I mean, I thought that was what all governments said they were all about, so let us see. You see the riders right there. But let me just show you this one. It's at the bottom of the front page of the Nigerian News Direct, and you see over 5.9 million electricity customers billed inaccurately by discos.
5 million.
Well, if you were to round it up, it would be 6 million because it's 5.9 million. And we were just talking about the banking sector. We're talking about the power sector as well. But some would say maybe it's even the power sector that has a lot of issues, really.
There was even a time that, an increase was surreptitiously implemented without an official notice somewhat. Consumers just noticed, a sufficient decrease in the amount of time, that a particular unit of electricity bought lasts for. So all of those issues, who's protecting the interest of the consumer?
It's interesting you asked that question because we'll be getting answers to that on the show this morning. But there's more stories on the front page of the Nigerian News Direct, but we'll just leave you to do the choosing this morning.
Speaking of choosing, this may also interest you this morning from the front page of the Daily Times. Resurgence of killings nationwide tops NAS agenda this week, and they have a lot of talking to do. But much more than talking, government also needs to walk the talk. Security chiefs face tough screening. Some ministerial nominees fail routine clearance. It appears that work is already beginning in that regard. And above the nameplate Well, let's go to the bottom of the nameplate now. This is another interesting issue. Why foreign airlines dread operating within Nigeria. And lastly, we know military personnel involved in illegal oil bunkering. That's ascribed to Niger Delta Group, which seems to be backing the Niger Delta agitator Asari Dokubo, who spoke just a few weeks back. And that ends it for the Daily Times and pretty much also for the newspaper review. We will be delving into all of those issues for you this morning, but that will be after the break. We'll be right back.
Right, welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Yes, we'll be talking about consumer-related matters and a lot more this morning. As you've seen there, Mr. Babatunde Rukera joins us this morning. He is the Executive Vice Chair and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, used to be Council. It's now FCCPC. Good to see you again, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
You know, well, I was just talking this morning, there are just several items all over the place you look that a consumer needs help in one way or the other. What is the magnitude of the challenge that your office faces at the moment?
Very large.
Wow.
The challenge is pretty large. The only thing I would say is we're digging from far below, and we still are making some progress. Two things. Increasing consumer dissatisfaction is a factor of two things in Nigeria. It is a reflection of the quality of services or goods that they receive on the one hand, but on a slightly positive hand is the fact that it's also a reflection of increasing discrimination by consumers and feelings of aggravation because they're becoming more aware. And to some extent, they're finding out there are at least channels to express that dissatisfaction, whether it's a regulatory channel or a name and shame, the social media. And so what it is that the combination of these two things show a prognosis of some future of positivity. But I would still say that on two grounds, with respect to how businesses treat their customers, on the whole, is still a failing grade. With respect to the quality, the scope, and the intensity of regulatory responses, I would say we've come up some way, but the playing field is still extremely large, and there's still a lot to cover.
You know, because maybe I should even ask, I mean, what did you find as the main challenge, the main reason why these things happen? Because sometimes it comes across as though these organizations feel they can do all of these things and get away with it and nothing happens.
Three things. The most important component of any robust right enforcement framework is a discriminatory consumer, people who demand on their rights and insist. And so a lack of awareness of your rights is number one. And number two is a corporate culture of not caring one way or the other. Number three is a history where that hasn't been the core of regulatory focus. And so, for instance, in aviation, we've worked so hard to regulate safety. In food and drugs, we've worked so hard to regulate the food security, drug security, making sure that there are no fakes, the active ingredient in medication is appropriate. But we have not really paid attention to consumer behavior, consumer protection. And I keep saying that at the end of the day, consumer protection should not be ancillary to business. It must be the core of the business. It doesn't matter whether it's power, it doesn't matter whatever it is. Consumers are the core of the business. And so that orientation is taking time. I mean, even in fast-moving consumer goods, I once ran a poll, and I engaged some of the executives of some of the major multinationals in fast-moving goods, especially food. And what we did was we bought cartons or boxes of their products from the Middle East, from Dubai, from England, from the US. And we saw that on the pack itself, there was guidance to consumers on how to complain if they were displeased and who on the other side would respond. But for the same businesses, the same parks, the same brands in Nigeria, there was nothing. There's no information. So they were not providing information at all. And so all that culture needs to change.
I have a theory, and you can tell me how much of my theory is correct. I'm going to say that, well, let's say the corporate culture of many institutions derive from how they perceive that the Nigerian government treats its own citizens. I do not know whether this also falls under the jurisdiction of the FCCPC, but if, you know, if people complain, for instance, of not getting government services, can they come to you? And if if the corporate environment senses that these people don't even, the government doesn't really care about them, why should we? We're just selling stuff to them.
And so there is a part of that that could be arguably potentially correct, but it doesn't end there. To the question about whether we regulate government also, when the government engages in commerce, if you provide services for benefit, whether it's transport services or whatever it is, then we engage. Now, when the government provides services as a government responsibility, that's not commerce.
That's water,
even water could be commerce if there's a charge and a fee when it's privatized. Yeah. Okay. But when for something like law enforcement or maybe a passport issuance and all of that, we get engaged, we engage, but that's not a core mandate. In those cases, you go to Servicom. The government itself has an internal mechanism to hold itself accountable. But primarily, consumer protection by the FCCPC is for commerce. And so to the question about whether companies treat people in the manner that their government allow, government has a role in making sure that the people are treated with respect. No question about that. But there's absolutely nothing that will excuse a corporate behavior, because in reality, it's commerce. There is a commercial contract between a company and its consumers and a social pact. And you owe that consumer a responsibility. Now, the government's failure, if at all, is that we do not have the most robust consequence management system. But in reality, companies understand that their brands depend on what their consumers, what their customers feel about their brands. And so it is even more important that you have consumers who are willing to insist on their rights and to hold companies accountable to themselves, much more than it is that you have a government that will jump on your back, because that will not be consistent.
So it would seem that consumers begin to realize, I mean, as you said, we have very poor consequence management. And yes, while consumers might want to exercise their rights, you know, to get better services, etc., they've since found out that, you know, even when they complain, there is not much that is done. You know, or there's very little that can be done, especially if these services are needed by, you know, by the companies that provide them. If those people are, you know, close to monopolies as can be, there's only very little that can, you know, come off their complaints. So I don't know how this will work. Maybe that's why you see people resorting more to social media to see if they can name and shame and maybe get more people on their side. But very rarely is it happening that, you know, when people complain, especially about big companies who do not really rely on retail consumers, you know, to make a profit. Maybe I'm underestimating that. But maybe look to fellow companies like themselves for them to make a huge turnover. How do we then, you know, begin to protect the rights of those smaller entities to ensure that their rights are not trampled upon? And
so you said two things. There's a consumer protection aspect of that, and then there's a competitive market aspect of that, and both of them are within the mandate of the FCCPC. And I'd say that the FCCPA, which is the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Act, is less than 5 years old. It was enacted in January of 2019. Prior to that, we had the Consumer Protection Council Act, and so the FCCPC used to be the CPC. I would say that some of the growth we've experienced is because of there was that change in legislation, and it's actually been phenomenal. And so it takes time. And the market was, Nigeria is a very large and very robust economy. And most of these businesses had been doing their business in a certain way. especially businesses were extremely vertically integrated. Businesses provided their own infrastructure, they have their own transport system, and so their whole supply chain to some extent depended on them. And each of those pieces have competition implications. For instance, if you're a manufacturer of a fast-moving product, but you have a very large transportation distribution network, it has become a facility that others should be able to use. And so one day at a time, and when you have a new competition regulation, you don't just go into the market and deconstruct what has existed. So it's going to take time. And I can assure you that companies are becoming far more conversant with the fact that there is a regulatory framework that's holding them accountable. But, you know, like everything else, you're going to keep putting in and putting in and putting in before you begin to see the best results. And from a consumer protection standpoint, I would say to you that we're seeing a lot more companies now in the FCCPC than we ever saw in the CPC. I took on the role when it was still the CPC, so I've seen the transition, I've seen the migration, and I can tell you that the responsiveness of companies to the regulatory process has gone up. What we need to do is to make sure that companies also ultimately imbibe the culture that the regulatory system should not be where you're most responsive. The regulatory system should be, because how many cases will come to the regulator? Yeah. You must be responsive to people so that you don't even get through the regulatory system.
Well, talking about pharmaceuticals, I mean, I get to hear several cases where they say, look, there are some pharmaceuticals, there are some pharmacies, supermarkets who are selling expired products that they doctor some of those labels on them, and so people may not necessarily know. So in that kind of case, who do they report to? Is it your office or...
There are multiple places, multiple places to go for that. NAFDAC for one, the FCCPC, and in any case, the alteration of an expiration date or key features of the label is actually a crime. And so even if you reported that to the police, that's obviously something, because we take that as a law enforcement issue, not just a regulatory issue. We would prosecute when we find that.
So some specific cases now. The one about the hospital, Mayfield, because we also saw it online where the people had said, well, the individual sustained injuries while on a bike and then got to the hospital and then had this asthma attack, and the hospital didn't have any facility specifically for that particular case. And so they, from what they published, say that the individual died as a result of that particular scenario. But it may be complicated now, but you're involved in that matter. What can you tell us about it?
So what we can say is that we became aware of this incident, and we've paid quite some attention to the healthcare value chain, as you probably know, and conducted some investigations in that area. We introduced a Patient's Bill of Rights, which we enforce and work with others to enforce. And in this particular case, what we understand is that there was a vehicular accident that included these riders, and one of the riders was transported to the hospital by the operatives of the Federal Road Safety Corps. And what happened between when he arrived at the hospital and when he ultimately passed away, the nature of the injuries, and all that's quite controversial. And so we've gone in and we're conducting an investigation. The one thing I know from just being a litigator and also engaging in these types of things is that an accident, I mean, visible injuries may not speak to the totality of what the nature of injuries are. Now, and then many times in an emergency, it's a race against time. So it's the timeliness of the emergency intervention, the urgency of the care, and where necessary, escalation or referral that will matter. And so it might very well be that this hospital didn't have, maybe the story is true, that this person ultimately died of an asthma. It might very well be, and it might not be. Now, if it is, it might not necessarily mean that something went wrong. And if it is not, it doesn't mean that something didn't go wrong. For instance, even if that wasn't the case, what care did this fellow get? What kind of responsiveness? What sense of urgency did this facility demonstrate. And we've executed a search on the facility to get as much information as we can. We would ultimately get into the question of the medical notes will show whether he had an asthmatic attack or not, and what medications were administered or not. We've asked for the inventory of what the hospital had at the time, and then several pieces of evidence that we would be looking at over the coming weeks. We would be speaking to a lot of other people also, including the Road Safety Corps operatives. And typically, an investigation of this nature will make it public. The law requires some of our investigations to be public, but we're more concerned about investigations in the healthcare, because the government is coming from a position, and even the entire industry, is coming from a position of significant trust deficit in the public. And so, because in things of this nature, they're sensitive. You can't tell what went wrong or what didn't go wrong. The only way to make sure that everybody can sign up to the conclusion and agree with it, and respect it, whether they agree with it or not, is that there's a transparent, open investigation. Because even when something is transparently investigated, if you don't like the outcome, you at least accept it. And so we would make this quite public so people would know.
Do you have a timeline that you're working with?
Typically, we cannot say one way or the other, but this one seems to have progressed quite quickly. Executing a search on the hospital that quickly and gathering the amount of information we have is an indication that this would not be a very long investigation. We've also been in contact with the Medical and Dental Council of Nigeria to at least advise them and let them know. And we've made sure that the nature of this investigation is not complicated. It's purely the consumer protection investigation. We're not trying to determine whether any medical or other professional acted ethically in accordance with their professional code or not, which is probably one that is more contentious. So I would say it won't be that long.
Well, how do we get it when you publish this? What platforms are you going to publish it on?
Typically, healthcare investigations, especially when it results in fatalities, is public. It would even be on live television.
Oh, okay. Good, because, people need to see some of these things. And then there's also this particular case that came up with Disco, Ikeja Disco. They sent me messages to persons who couldn't access. They thought, look, what's going on? Is there anything happening here? But a good thing that you're also aware on that particular matter, because at the time, they said they couldn't get any of those tokens, as it were, but much later, after the time had elapsed, they were able to get access. What did you find when you looked into it?
So here's what we found, and the complaint was that people were not able to vend. And there was an allegation that it was potentially pending a change in tariff. And so what we did was to put out a statement and saying, Ikeja, you better beware. And not just because of Ikeja, but it's also putting out those statements. It's not just information to the public, it's also the signal to everybody else. There what? How many discos in the country? They should know that anybody who does this is swimming in dangerous waters. And we engaged Ikeja. And our ultimate understanding was that there was also an intensity in vending. People who also anticipated that the tariff may change also wanted to stock up and save, as a forestalling.
Which was what a number of discos advised. We can confidently say that Abuja Disco advised its customers to stock up pending this particular increment.
Some did.
Yeah, pending this, how will I put it now, expectation of increment in tariff. So, that was what they were telling their customers, advising them to save money ahead of time when they thought it was good. So why would a disco not prepare for an increment, for an increased, traffic on its website as a result of people trying to just save a few bucks,
And that's an important point. But in the absence of something that is objectively uniform, you cannot hold one person accountable. I don't know why Abuja Disco said that to their customers. There was absolutely no clarity. As far as we know, there was no statement about an increase in tariff. And Ikeja could have been operating from the standpoint of, we don't know that there will be an increase in tariff. And so they didn't advise their customers to stock up, and they did. And from what we also heard, many of the vendors are third-party agents. And so it's really how much they put in their wallet that they're able to vend. So a lot of the vending delays were from these third-party agents who had run out of units to vend out. And so I don't exonerate Ikeja Disco, but it seems to us from our engagement with them that they didn't hold back vending privileges on account of a potential increase. Now, the failure result in another type of consumer frustration that they should address, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, what it shows is the fundamental infrastructural weaknesses in their vending apparatus. Because why should we be having a conversation about whether consumers have an opportunity to vend or not? If their apparatus, if their infrastructure works well, it really shouldn't matter. If any consumer wants to vend ₦1 million at any time, they should be able to vend ₦1 million. Why are you restricting the ability or the discretion of consumers to vend? But the point that I was making is ultimately we didn't find any credible evidence that this was preemptive, that they restrained consumers preemptively so they could make more money in a matter of days. But with the subject of whether their infrastructure or their vending apparatus is sufficiently robust for consumers, that's a continuing discussion.
All right, let's bring in our colleagues in Lagos. Go ahead, guys.
All right, thank you, Chebelin. And this naturally leads me to that question about the quality of service consumers receive from distribution companies. I just saw on one of the front pages, Nigerian News Direct, that about 5.9 million consumers were billed incorrectly, according to a report. So there's a talk about even increasing tariffs. And usually what you hear the customers, both households and companies, says, we're not even getting quality, we're not getting constant electricity supply. So which will come first, better quality or higher tariffs?
I'm lost.
I hope you got that, Sir Kara.
I didn't get the end of it, but I got most of it. I think the question comes down to...
No, the question is which will come first?
Service quality.
Yeah, better service, yes, or increased tariff in this case.
And honestly, I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, and I don't even think one goes before the other. The reality of it is that if people are paying for something, they should be getting the right quality of it. Now, the question of tariff, that's a commercial issue. That's a question. That's a value proposition of whether the right price for a service is what the prevailing rate is. And there are two things that I'm concerned as a consumer protection advocate. One, consumers should not overpay. And so for that, on the estimated billing, I can say without any question about what the tariff is, we absolutely reject this continuing estimated billing. And we understand that it's something that could take time to conclude, but that window needs to narrow very quickly. And the billing framework needs to be such that it does not provide an additional benefit to the discos. They should not be able to make more money because of estimated billing. It should be either that they make less or they make exactly what it would have been under a tariff. Now, with respect to fixing tariff, there's a methodology to that. There is a regulator who does that, and so we don't have that competence, we don't have the mandate, and we certainly don't have the skills to be able to determine what the tariff should be. The only thing that provides some level of comfort to us as consumer regulators, protection regulators, and someone checking to make sure that people are not charged excessively for what they take is that when there's a regulator who participates in tariff setting, it provides at least some comfort that it is not likely that consumers will be exploited from what those tariffs are. Now, does that eliminate the hardship that consumers experience? No, not necessarily. The hardship is a different thing. Exploitation is a different thing. And I think both of them are important discussions. I think consumers must not be exploited and should not experience hardship.
Because for a lot of people, they feel they're being overcharged anyway since they're not getting quality service. So if the tariffs go up, that's like double jeopardy for them. But you raise a very important point about regulation. I see on social media FCCPC being tagged to literally everything. Landlord-tenant issues, they tag you. Different issues, maybe because you've been quite responsive, to those issues. But there are regulators. For the electricity sector, there's NERC. For telecommunications, there's the NCC. Even for this, hospital issues, you have regulatory bodies that are tasked with that responsibility. So why is that the case? Is it that the regulatory bodies are not doing what they ought to do right, such that people say, if you won't listen to us, let's just go to the FCCPC, because it would look like you might be overwhelmed at this rate?
Well, I mean, I would say we do get a lot of work, and so what it is that consumer protection is not our core mandate, it is our exclusive mandate in addition to competition. But for some of these regulators, they have a mandate, and consumer protection is just an additional component of their mandate. And so it could be a resource allocation issue for those regulators, whereas for us, our entire resources are dedicated to regulating competition in the marketplace and consumer protection. But I would say that the totality of the regulatory capacity that exists for consumer protection in the country is still very small compared to what the real scope of commerce is. And the way we would succeed is making sure that the responsibility for responsiveness and sensitivity must move to the businesses. It is absolutely inappropriate that consumers can find me easier than they can find the business that sold a product to them. And what I've continued to say to the business is that the government is subsidizing your business. You've literally made the FCCPC a multi-company customer service desk. And we continue to say this, and we continue to tell companies at some point that's going to stop. And really, really soon, we're close to writing regulations that makes us abundantly a secondary level complaint resolution mechanism, in which case it's only complaints that companies do not respond to that we would respond to. And when we resolve complaints on behalf of companies, we'll make the companies pay for it. Companies need to have their own stand-alone complaint resolution mechanisms to serve their customers. And when they advertise their products, they need to advise the customers exactly what to do when they're dissatisfied, when they want feedback.
Right.
Most of the companies that we've engaged don't have standalone complaint resolution mechanisms. It's tied into some customer service or feedback mechanism. And so the government, so the companies look bad, they make the government look bad, and everybody looks bad. And so we must move to that point where it's the companies that people are reaching out to when they're dissatisfied. The government should not be mediating literally every complaint about airtime, about a failed transaction, about a short fill in a drink. There's nowhere in the world where those kinds of frameworks succeed.
Well, it also points to the fact that a lot of these regulators have a lot of work to do, because you can't expect the companies to also regulate themselves. You know what to expect from that. But we're due for a break right now. The usual suspects, they would say, the aviation sector, for example, the loan apps conversation, we'll come to that in a moment. It's a big one, definitely. So that's in a moment. Stay with us. Back. We're talking consumer protection and competition this morning, but consumer protection is always a big one because there are more consumers than the companies that provide services and goods. And we're still being joined by Mr. Abuja Inquirer, who is the Executive Vice Chair and the CEO of the FCCPC, speaking with us from our Abuja studios. Thank you so much for staying with us. I was going to enter the realm of aviation sector, which has been giving a lot of people headaches. Not of late, really, for quite some time now. And just recently, the NCA released that report about cancelled and delayed flights. And, according to that report, we saw that Air Peace operated the most with 6,521 flights, out of which about 57% were delayed. Also, Max Air recorded high flight delays, even for cancellations as well. You saw those airlines also cancelling most of the flights. And you fly a lot. A lot of Nigerians fly a lot. And we know that you can almost predict that your flight will be delayed maybe 8 out of 10 times. Now, well, the figure says about 6 out of 10 times. It looks like it's not really getting better, honestly, because if that's the figure for first quarter of 2023, you wonder, what's going on, really?
Well, if the airline operating community is not embarrassed by this, then I honestly don't know what could possibly embarrass anybody, because it is actually a dismal, extremely dismal performance to say that the airline that operates the most flights in the country on a daily basis would have 58% of its flights delayed or cancelled. And that's one of the better performances. I think IBOM was identified as the one with the best performance at 35%, which is incredibly high. Just saying that more than a third of the flights are either delayed or cancelled. And all you need to do is to extrapolate that and just think about how much resource the country loses, how much time we're wasting, how many appointments are missed, how many appointments are delayed, and you can't even begin to capture the full extent of what kind of a loss of work time and labor time to a country this must be. And I think it calls for a far more serious conversation. As a matter of fact, internally in the FCCPC, as we read this report, what we did was we immediately reach out to our colleagues at the Civil Aviation Authority. So we're going to have to sit down and come to some understanding on what works and what doesn't work. But I think that what NCA has done is the first shot at what works. I think even providing this information, data, you can't go wrong when you have accurate data. So providing the information and for each of the airlines to see what their performances are is a starting point. One of the most important conversations we had continued to have is that we need this type of information. We don't need it annually. We need to be able to put things out there, to put a display and show consumers that this is how the airlines are performing on a daily basis, so that consumers determine how to hedge their bets and what risks to take with respect to what airline to travel with. And once we start to do that, it will motivate the airlines to be far more... I expect this report alone to create some level of introspection and reflection amongst the airlines. And they're going to have to sit and want to be amongst the best. And so I think that this step itself, as alarming as it is, for us, is a very important step. And I think it's the beginning of an accountability framework that hopefully would make things better. I recognize that there are many issues and infrastructure deficits and all of that, but nothing, absolutely nothing can explain the sheer magnitude of these delays and failures. And like we've always said, delays and cancellations in air travel are inevitable, even from a safety standpoint, inevitable. There are all kinds of things, I mean, a snag on an aircraft, weather, that make it unsafe to fly. And I'm almost certain, just like me, nobody, no passenger wants to fly when it's unsafe. As a matter of fact, when there's a problem and you reassure them it's safe to fly, they still say, no, I'm not convinced. And so nobody wants to fly when it's unsafe, and will understand when the delays are limited to legitimate circumstances. But what needs to happen more is even some level of transparency and communication. Tell them the truth and comply with the law. Let people know ahead of time, and don't have people sitting at the airports having to go to the counters repeatedly to ask questions. But this doesn't happen with domestic airlines alone. I was traveling over the weekend between Switzerland and Nigeria, and I wanted to change my departure flight from Geneva to London. I was traveling on British Airways. I'm calling them out. And I didn't get any notification that said my flight had been cancelled. I just went online and Google, type in, tell me how many departures British Airways has from Geneva to London, because I wanted to see which was an earlier one that I could go fly standby, only to see that the flight that I was going to be on in less than 24 hours was cancelled. I didn't know. And so I had to activate a process. If I didn't do this by myself, I would not be sitting here this morning. I would only just be arriving in Nigeria this morning. It would have cost me another 24 hours or more to arrive in. And so this is a problem that's global. The scale of it is problematic in Nigeria. And I believe that what NCA has done is an incredibly bold and courageous step to hold the airlines accountable. So I think we're on to better days.
All right, so what do you do with insurance? Because several people too feel that a lot should be done in that sector because people sign on insurance packages, they don't get anything whatsoever. Do you experience any challenge in that area?
Absolutely. I mean, on a daily basis, we get complaints about the people who've paid their premiums, and when the time comes for an insurance to pay out, or when the life cycle of a policy has come up, insurance companies don't pay out. And we're handling those complaints on a daily basis. We've had a conversation, multiple conversations with the core regulator, the Insurance Commission. In fact, we have a mutual understanding with them for resolving these complaints and holding the insurance companies accountable, and that's going on. But again, like I said, the success of a consumer protection regulatory framework is not the speed of resolving complaints. It's really eliminating as much of these basic complaints as possible. And I think the steps that are started happening in the insurance industry has reduced some of this, has been consolidation, and we're beginning to see those consolidations begin to materialize, because it was, you know, and what the complaints also tell us is it's an indication of the stress test of an industry. And so it could show that insurance companies were becoming cash-strapped if they were not paying at the end of policies, but the consolidation is beginning to reduce that.
Okay. So I'd like to know, I mean, considering the scope of work that you have to do, I imagine that, you know, money is also going to, and you will certainly need to be financed. How is that working for the FCCPC? And so
the FCCPC, starting from CPC even into the FCCPC, was a treasury-funded agency. But we've completely migrated, and as of this year, it's fully self-funded. It's payroll, that is personnel cost, it's capex, it's capital expenditure, and it's overhead, all completely fully funded, and we return money to the government. We give 40% of our income to the government, and at the end of the year, whatever we do not, whatever is extra budgetary for us, the government still takes it. And I'm proud to say that we've succeeded as a self-funded agency. As a self-funded agency, we've been able to do more than we were able to do when we were self-funded. And what that means for companies is that you now have a regulator who's going to hold you accountable, because holding you accountable is the source of his own livelihood. And I agree with that. I completely agree with that model. I think the government should be able to focus its resources on a lot of other things than funding regulators who are regulating businesses. There's no reason why the government should be paying for the malfeasance of businesses. The businesses should be held responsible for their own malfeasance. So it is in the interest of the regulator to actually look in your business. If you are not responsive, they will be responsive to your unresponsive. Oh, if you're not responsive, you cut out a check.
Wow. But are you required by law to refund money to government, return money?
I mean, the law says that you're responsible for your revenue. However, what it says is that you have a budget. Whatever, I mean, and budget is different from revenue. That you make money doesn't mean you must spend all of your money. Your budget must still be based on what are your real, true, reasonable needs. And so whatever is in excess of those needs, it's not your money, right? It's the money of the federal government. So what I'm wondering now is, because when you make money, when you now become a self-funded agency, and yes, indeed, there is good incentive for you to be very interested in malfeasance and the irresponsiveness of government, corporate bodies to their customers. But then, people also say that tendency for abuse could also arise within the FCCPC. Is it something you've considered, and what checks are you putting in place? And that is the case. I mean, the tendency for abuse, you certainly don't want an agency of this that regulates commerce and that does such sensitive work to begin to become a revenue-generating agency, looking to whack people just because that's the only way they can make their own pay. And so there is the potential. Now, I won't say tendency. There is the potential, but I would say that our approach to our work, and even the companies will tell you, the biggest penalties wouldn't be from small errors. We're not walking around looking for people who, but there are, especially in the competition aspect, there are things that you do that globally you recognize if you snooze, you're going to lose. And that's where the big ticket items will come from. Indeed, as it were today, to show you that we're not going out there we do not charge, other than merger notification fees. With the consumer protection aspect, there's not one fee. No registration fees, no licensing, no approval. We don't register products. We don't do anything. We don't take any money from companies. We don't approve any products. We don't do anything. The only time you would have a problem with the FCCPC and you have to cut a check, other than if you're merging, as at today, is you've done something wrong. And doing that thing wrong is not that we just show up and say you've done something wrong. We carry out a broad investigation. You're confronted with it. We make an order. You don't agree. You've got your rights to appeal. But if you choose not to appeal, you come to terms with your malfeasance and deal with it at the FCCPC.
And it doesn't look like the FCCPC is about to start losing money, because there are so many infractions in this country, almost everywhere, and that is really, really sad. Yes. And
you're right. However, the focus, especially with consumer protection, the focus is corrective measures.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the cost and the resource for those investigations can make it even net negative when you think about, I mean, what's the fine you're going to impose when you allocate all these resources for an investigation, when they could be doing a bunch of other things, especially when you're not paying your own salaries. Every man hour means a lot to you. Yeah. So you want to allocate those resources in the most productive way.
So you also looked into the POS, because there was this group, I think they had, I don't know if they formed a group or something, they issued a statement that they were going to fix prices, and people thought, even the CBN had to speak up at some point. What are you doing in that regard?
And again, when it comes, Nigeria is a free market. And that means price is something that is negotiated in the marketplace. So we don't fix prices generally. However, a fair price is the price that is negotiated in an undistorted market. And so if a group of competitors on the platform of an association, which is a good thing for them to have an association, come together and decide on price, that's a distorted market. That price can never, ever be a fair price. The input costs are different. I might operate my business right outside my door, in which case I don't pay rent. You have your business down the road, you pay rent, you transport yourself. Those input costs are different. I use a different type of car from you. I consume much more fuel than you. Those input costs are different. Your pricing model should be based on your input costs and whatever margins you consider satisfactory to you. I would do the same. That's what competitors do. And that's why they compete for the custom of the consumers. You price in a way where you're giving an innovation, efficiency, all those things affect price. And so when you on a platform say this is going to be the price, what you're doing is not even good for some of the competitors. You're not encouraging those who are efficient and innovative, because their price is going to be the same as those who don't do anything. And it's certainly not good for consumers. So what we've said is you cannot fix the price. Let each person determine what price they want to charge, and people would go to where they feel most satisfied.
One more sector, the banks. Because that's where all over social media you get to see people are complaining everywhere you turn. Even as I sit now, if I go check my phone, I could see some charges coming through that I don't understand what some of these things are. How are you able to deal with that?
The banks are one of the bigger problems, I must say that.
Just before you speak to, I want to ask you, which one of the sectors is your biggest headache? Is it the banks or the telcos?
Power, electricity.
Oh. Okay. So they take the cake.
They take the cake.
So they're first. Who's second?
Banks.
Banks. And third?
Aviation.
Aviation. Interesting. So telcos...
Telcos used to be second, third, but progressively...
they improved.
I don't know if it's that they've gotten better or others have gotten worse.
So let's deal with number two. Yes.
The banks. And so the banking industry is quite complex, because you've got two key regulators, the central bank and... in fact, one key regulator, as it were, because the current law, that is the Bank and Other Financial Institutions Act of 2020, excludes the FCCPA, which is the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Act, in some aspect. It's contentious, one way or the other, but we've continued to resolve complaints in the banks because they're the second largest. And all we just consider is, if we stopped doing that and said, well, the law, we can go focus our resources on something else. But just like you said, look at the sheer number of people who the CBN would have to deal with, or probably would not be able to conclude dealing with. So we've stayed in the banking sector and using moral suasion, and then using other instruments of law to justify or legitimize engagement. And many of the banks do respond. I suspect also because of our reputation, and then hardly any of the banks is willing to roll the dice by going to court to say that we do not have the jurisdiction or the power. I mean, and if any of them would do that, we would go to court, and hopefully they would learn very quickly what that, how that outcome could be for them and for others. But one thing is very clear, and one of the things we've strongly advocated is that banks need to have the entire financial system need to have some other service level understanding between themselves and the payment systems, and so that the front end of transactions that don't go well will not be the customers getting the short end of the stick. For instance, if you're paying for a ticket and the money has left your bank account, the understanding for the settlement should be between the bank and the payment gateway that they choose to use, not you who doesn't get your ticket and has lost your money. And I think if we move to that, because most of the complaints with the banking system now are electronic transactions. And so if we can just go to a more methodical process for that, I believe that we would solve most of the problems.
All right, I'm afraid we need to go, but I see Vanguard saying after 2 court judgments, customs still charge duties on personal effects of arriving travelers in our airports. This has been brought to the attention of FCCPC in Nigeria, but it continues. Are you aware of this?
So that would be forwarded from us to Customs and Servicom, because Customs it's not in commerce.
Okay. All right, we do thank you for coming on, Babatunde Irukara, Executive Vice Chairman, Chief Executive of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, FCCPC. Thank you for coming on, and all the best to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you.
All right, we will be back in just a moment. We'll have Pastor Ituai Ighodalo joining us next. Find out what he's going to talk about. Don't go away.
Last administration, there were certain regulations and executive orders that were signed in relation to tax imposition on certain categories of goods and services and all related matters. However, in furtherance to the President Tinubu's avowed commitment to constantly dialogue with Nigerians and listen here to the yearnings and aspirations of our people, we are here this morning to let you have an insight into the recent executive orders that the President has signed. The President has given an order suspending the 5% tax on telecommunication services as well as the excise duty escalation on locally manufactured goods.
Well, central to growing any economy is a conversation around revenue. Of course, closely tied to revenue, of course, taxes. One of the things they say is sure about life. And as you can see, Pastor Ituai Ighodalo joins us on the program this morning. He's a chartered accountant and Deputy Chairman, SIAO Professional Services, joins us via Zoom from here in Lagos. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on Sunrise Daily.
Good morning very much. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Right, it's great to have you. Let's try to break down the issues. So we have what a lot of people have described as an ailing economy to revive. And just a few days ago, we saw the president signing those executive orders, suspending, some of those taxes and goods and services. And just after, the president also set up a committee on tax reform. So it looks like maybe all of these activities are geared towards something in particular. But regarding tax reforms, raising revenue, help us understand this. Just how much of work or job is ahead of this government in that area?
Quite a lot of work, because government has somehow not paid enough attention on tax. as a source of government revenue. They set their FRS some targets. The FRS struggles to get some of those targets through foul or fair means, and at the end of the day, they keep going. But there's a lot of issues challenging tax in Nigeria right now. The first issue, as far as I'm concerned, is data and the making sure everybody's tax inclusive. Nigeria consists of a formal and informal economy, and the informal economy, the one that's not captured in statistics or in banking and all that, is a bit more, it's much bigger than the formal economy. The formal economy is civil servants, a few people employed in oil and gas, banking and all that. You capture them. If you corporate people, you capture them. But there's a huge amount of people in the markets, on the side streets, in the interlands, in the rural places. Most of them simply don't pay tax. So the first thing that the government really needs to do is to get everybody on the tax net. They seem unable to do this because they're not even able to solve a problem of statistics, of identification, of the national ID. And any country that does not have a national ID system, does not have the data, does not have the knowledge, does not have the information on its people, it cannot provide good taxation, cannot manage its people, cannot plan, it cannot also provide enough security because you don't know where the people are. You don't know how to get them. You know, most advanced countries, they have a good ID system. America has social security number, Britain has their own ID system, and with that, you're able to track your people. You know where they are, you know how they move, you know what the migration rates are and all that. But Nigeria just has no information to date because we've played so much politics and corruption with something as simple as population and national ID. So until you can get the people totally on the tax net, we will not really know how much we're losing from not being able to pay tax. So you may want to adjust the tax laws, do this to the tax laws and all that, but it's still, for me, just a palliative. It's not really touching the heart of the issue.
You said get more Nigerians into the tax net. What a lot of people will interpret that as is get more people to pay taxes. Imagine maybe you're talking about a database, have more people on the database first so you can know just how many people we have. But let's stretch this even further. Just let's imagine that widening the tax net means more people have to pay taxes. Can Nigerians really afford to pay more taxes? I mean, we have poverty figures, multidimensional poverty figures released recently saying 133 million Nigerians are multidimensionally poor. So just how much more can Nigerians pay? We'll get to the government side, but let's speak to that. Can Nigerians really pay more taxes?
Well, everybody should pay some tax. It's just a question of your mindset. So if you're earning 1,000 naira, surely you can pay 5 pence or 5 kobo tax, or 10 kobo tax, or 1 naira tax. Tax is tax. So everybody should pay some form of tax because everybody's benefiting or should be benefiting from some public service provision, from roads to water to electricity, blah, blah, blah. So everybody can pay tax. It's just a question of mindset. I don't even think there's anybody really too poor to pay tax. It's just what should the tax rate be. So like I said, you're earning 1,000 naira. Surely 50 kobo or 1 naira or 2 naira you can pay as some form of tax, if you change your thinking. So if everybody in Nigeria was paying 1% or 2% or 3% at the minimum of whatever they are earning as tax, you can work out the maths. It will be a phenomenal amount. But then, of course, the more you earn on a graduated scale, the more proportionate tax you should pay so that you yourself reduce a bit of your own personal consumption so that you can contribute towards the social services that you are benefiting from. That's the whole idea of tax. Part of the problem with tax is that the education of people paying tax is not well done. So everybody needs to go on the road, everybody needs to have pipe of water, everybody needs to have electricity. So what we're saying by asking you to pay tax is for you to contribute to the social services that you yourself are enjoying. So in the end, taxation really, you are paying yourself to benefit from things that are communal, but the problem with Nigeria is that government hitherto has not been sincere. Government hitherto has been very, very corrupt. Government hitherto has not delivered to the people the benefits of governance and the results of their being managed. So people are very, very, very unhappy. People are apprehensive, and people are having to provide for themselves infrastructure and facilities that government should be providing. So there's a whole gamut of things that needs to be dealt with for us to have an effective government and effective taxation.
Yeah, Pastor Ito, corruption is another big matter. But before we delve into that, I want you to educate us on those items in the tax review, particularly with the committee having been constituted, whether it's the VAT on telecommunications, the single-use tax, the green tax on vehicles, and the tobacco tax. As the committee will begin discussions, what are those points that should be emphasized upon in the deliberations, such that when it will be implemented, it will be from an informed position, such that it will be a win-win for those paying and for the operators within the manufacturing sector where those taxes are concerned?
For tax to be beneficial, it has to be real, realistic, it has to be fair, it has to be progressive, it has to be beneficial, okay? So what had happened was that, first of all, most of the tax laws in Nigeria are very archaic, very old, most of them from 1950-something, 1960-something, 1970-something, and they don't speak to the reality of our developmental needs in Nigeria at this point in time. That's one. Number two is that a lot of governments have not been really sincere as to how to handle the issues of tax, and they have not been very forthright in dealing with the realities of the on ground. Thirdly, the Buhari government went into a state of panic. You have a budget that's about 6 or 7 trillion in deficit. So even before you wake up, you're already owing. You don't even have enough money that you're generating to pay your salaries for workers. So where are you starting from? So they went into a panic because they went into this spending spree, wanting to spend to reflate the economy, borrowing all over the place, and suddenly the revenues and the expenditure didn't make sense. You were making like 6 trillion naira, and now you want to spend 12 or 13 trillion naira on an economy that's not working and that's not generating income. So they decided to face tax and see what they could do with tax, because we've had almost a 1 unit oil revenue source, and even that revenue source is so inefficiently managed that we're not getting the best out of it. So they went into this so-called Finance Act 2022 to see areas in which they could just harvest money. So they faced telecom because they believe that the telecom companies were making money, and they put in a 5% there and asked the telecoms to be paying, forgetting that the telecoms are providing such a great service and reducing stress on Nigerians that there'll be some kind of kickback. They also went into green tax on plastic use and all that. I think that's a response to international environment issues. And they didn't even explain to the people what all this green tax means, and they just slapped it on. Then they went into excise duty on importation, excise duty on manufacturing, which to me didn't quite make sense, because what we're trying to do in Nigeria is to reflate the economy and get people to be manufacturing. Now, if you start dissuading people from manufacturing by increasing the cost of manufacture, it's likely people will run away from it, or it will be too expensive for us to manufacture in Nigeria. We can't compete with foreign goods, which is part of our problem, because we're importing most of the things that we use in Nigeria, when in the reality, most of those things can be produced in this same Nigeria, but we're importing them because we have such a flat economy that's not working, and so on and so forth. So the tax that the Buhari government put in was not very, very thought out. It was almost like, for me, a knee-jerk reaction and just a way for them to harvest some economy, some money. So I think the Tinubu government has come now, having removed the subsidy on oil, having adjusted the exchange rate. They are now saying, okay, what are the palliatives and comfort we can offer the people? And the first thing is to do is to balance this issue of taxation. Because one of the wrong things that the Buhari administration did was to even backdate the implementation of this so-called Finance Act 2023, because there had been a law in 2017 saying that if you are going to make any changes to taxation, you must give a 90-day window for the people to adjust and to reprogram themselves and to get into the new tax rate.
Pastor Itua, if I get you correctly, you're saying that most of these taxes are needless, and are you calling on the committee to repeal them, when they sit for this review?
Most of them, they should rethink them and repeal them, because what we want, from my own point of view, is to rebuild Nigerian economy. We want an environment that will encourage manufacture, encourage agriculture, encourage production, encourage business locally in Nigeria, and discourage importation. So what they should be facing is really increasing taxation on the things that we import, so that it's more expensive to import and cheaper to produce in Nigeria. That's what most countries do to protect their own economy. I'll give you an example. We are importing bitumen in Nigeria to produce roads, okay? And we have a great amount of bitumen in the Ondo area, in the Ogun area, and we're not touching it. And that bitumen is going to waste. We don't need to import bitumen. We have more than enough locally on the ground. So what we need to do is a tax regime that discourages the importation of bitumen and encourages Nigerians to produce bitumen locally, although that also might be a constitutional problem right now. But constitution, tax, reform constitution, change tax, so that Nigerians and even international people will be more encouraged to come into Nigeria to produce the things that we already have sitting on the ground. That's what this government should be thinking of doing.
But Pastor Itua, I hope we're not losing sight of the fact here that, government embarked on, this tax implementation drive in the first place to generate revenue such that the budget can be funded. If there's still so little to do, so much, and this taxes are repealed, wouldn't it, compel government to embark on securing loans yet again, which is already a big problem for the administration, which has the former administration, which has dug the country into a very big debt hole?
Unfortunately, the government didn't also tell us, project to us what they were hoping to generate from this new taxation and what proportion of this budget deficit it will fund. If it's a significant proportion, well, it can be like an emergency tax to cover that hole. But if it's not significant, then it's a total waste of time, and it's punitive on the people. So I don't have those figures. They may have those figures. We may look at it, but I can tell you for free that they didn't do that level of research. As I said, I think it was totally knee-jerk reaction to these things. Besides, one of the biggest challenges of our budget, and I stand to be corrected, is corruption and waste. You have a bloated civil service that is not producing, and you keep paying them. For example, you have 3 or 4 refineries that have not produced 1 drop of petrol in the past 10 years or 8 years. And those people working in those refineries are earning salaries, going on training, and doing all manners of things. It's a total waste. And that's just one of many. And even within the government establishments that are seeming to be producing, I think they can even do their work with a fraction of the staff that they have, that they're paying right now. And so the government expenditure doesn't make sense. And again, nobody has done what I call value for money audits on most of the expenditure of most governments, both subnational and national, in that a road that should cost 1 billion is costing 3 billion, 4 billion. And where does the difference go? It goes into private pockets. it goes into private expenditure, it goes into foreign exchange, it chases again the very scarce foreign exchange that we have. And we have Nigerians storing money all over the place that is not producing in the economy. So first of all, let us clean out the budget and let us see what we really need in Nigeria to keep the country going. I'm sure that if you cleaned out the budget sincerely, removed all the padding, removed all the waste, I'm sure that with 3 or 4 trillion, maybe 6 trillion, we can do what they're telling us that 12 trillion would do. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in Nigeria. And we need to, first of all, be sincere with ourselves. Government expenditure is phenomenal. It's unbearable. Convoys to start off with, overheads to start off with, salaries, which is not much, you understand? But the volume of people that you're paying, maybe that's our social security system anyway, but what proportion of Nigeria's population are being paid by government and they're earning so much? Okay, out of 200 million people, maybe 3 million are government staff, and they're taking almost 40 or 50% of our earnings. So most of Nigeria's money that we generate from outside is going to such a small proportion of people. So the rest are just left to their own devices, struggling all over the place, running up and down, So the percentages are a bit lopsided, What we should be spending on infrastructure and development, we're spending on consumption and salaries.
Well,
it just doesn't make sense.
Pastor Godalo, there's still that question about multiple taxation as well. You have states, charging multiple taxes. Just yesterday, I realized that, people pay taxes in Lagos for TV, like TV license taxes in Nigeria. And, I was really shocked. And that's aside different taxes for small businesses. But we'll come to that maybe, but let's go closer to the seat of power. Chamberlain.
Well, yeah, Pastor, from the look of things now, having seen some of the policies that the government has put in place, yes, they put in place a committee as well to look through some of these particular things. So how would you recommend we look at the broader picture? Because, they could talk about the short term, but on a larger scale, how would you recommend we approach this?
The issue of government funding, the issue of the economy, or the issue of politics, what really are you wanting me to focus on?
In terms of the policies on taxation.
First of all, we need data. We need information. The government simply does not have information. You are talking long-term now. We need information. Places like Canada, Australia, they plan 50 years in advance of things. They do future studies. So we need information. We need statistics. How many people are in the rural areas? How many people are in the urban areas? How many people are gainfully employed? How many people are self-employed? How many people are running companies? And so on and so forth. It is this data, okay, that will be able to tell us how best to plan our tax, who to tax, and how much to tax them, and where to get our taxation income from. What if we don't have data, we don't have information? It's just not going to be possible. It's as simple as that. So that's long-term planning. Number 2 is the vision of the government has to be very, very clear. What are we trying to achieve? What area of our expenditure do we put in more resource for the development of Nigeria over the next 10, 20, 30 years? That vision has to be clear. What do we want to put money on? Is it education to inform and upgrade the people and make them self-productive? Or is it infrastructure to create an environment where business can thrive? Or is it security so that the people are protected? And what percentages of our income do we need to put in these things? For instance, they should be able to tell us in Nigeria, how much do we need to spend on security to make sure that the place is safe? And how do we spend it? How much do we need to spend on education to make sure that 90% of Nigerians are educated over the next 5 years? How much do we need to spend on infrastructure to make sure that we can get our goods from the rural to the urban areas and then even house them and warehouse them and store them for people to eat. Nobody has that information. I can almost tell you for free. And if they do, they're not making it available. So we don't even know what to work towards in Nigeria. So when we do budgets, most of the time, it's based on last year's budget. You add a percentage and then you spend some more. But nobody's telling us that this is the outcome eventually over time of these monies that we're going to spend. When you don't even know where you are going, how can you get there? And when you get there, how do you know that this is where you intended to go? So a lot of these things are just by roads. People are just doing it, not thinking through, not giving us exactly what's going on. And Nigerians are just following. And it's like government is some kind of magic or some kind of big masquerade that just keeps going. You can't challenge them.
Indeed, the goals need to be clearer. But let me bring up this scenario, which is what I heard yesterday. Pastor Godal, I don't know if you can hear me.
Very well, I can hear you.
Fantastic. So I heard our data analyst talking about this executive orders that have now been signed and likening them to a lollipop, which he says is very sweet, but is not filling. And I don't know, I mean, from your own assessment of, the policies so far and the reliefs that it seeks to give businesses, how effective do you think that this is on the whole? Because he says that, for a number of businesses, this might come as a mild reprieve, but what they really need, what the average Nigerian really need is to tackle where inflation is really hurting the average Nigerian, because inflation has taxed Nigerians more than any other taxation that government has put on them. And one of the areas government should be looking to is curbing inflation and food insecurity. For you, I mean, as someone who is a finance expert, do you have any ideas how governments can begin to do this right now?
To tackle inflation and food security, most of these things people know. It's whether there's the tone at the top and the political will to do them, and whether it is beneficial to the implementators. That's the problem. I agree with your friend. This is a palliative, and that's what I used. He called it a lollipop. It's a palliative. First of all, those taxes had not even been properly effected. So we didn't even know the effect of those taxes. And it talks to only a small percentage of the economy. And it's good to correct it, to be sincere, because as I said, the last administration was a knee-jerk. They started implementing taxes that should be implemented 90 days later, almost immediately, just confusing the whole polity and all that. I think it was the telecom one that was the most incisive, and the telecom people pushed back. So Nigeria, what we need is a producing economy that is making all that it needs and using whatever it makes. So I said, if I was president of Nigeria, for example, the first thing I would tackle is food security. Very, very important. And it's very, very simple. We have more than enough land and potential to produce food in Nigeria. And what I'll simply say is that we eat what we produce. And we
goes to take over. I can't.
Are you with me? We eat what we produce, and we produce what we eat. So if we cannot produce it in Nigeria, we will not eat it in Nigeria. So whatever we are trying to import as food, we'll look for a Nigerian alternative. So instead of importing rice, let us just eat yam, as much yam as we want, until we're able to produce the rice we want to eat. Instead of importing corn, maize, let us just eat the maize that we produce until we're able to produce all the maize that we need. You may give a year or 2 years for people to readjust their thinking and then make sure that you implement this. You'll just find that everything we have growable in Nigeria, people begin to grow and eat it and forget about importing anything. That's number one. Number two is to educate the people to such a level in which they are self-productive. So you are educated enough to get a job. You are educated enough to be self-employed. You have enough skill to earn enough for yourself and to feed your family and to pay some taxation. The third, of course, is security, because where there's no security and people cannot move around freely, it is going to hurt and harm the economy. People won't come, people won't invest, either internationally or locally, and so on and so forth. If you're able to deal with security, then you have a lot of people able to go about their businesses and feed themselves and look after themselves. And then, of course, number 4 is power and infrastructure. Those are aids to production. When there's power, when there's infrastructure, what will take you 3 hours will probably take you 30 minutes or 15 minutes. It means you can do much more in less time, and it's not as expensive for you to do those things. If a government faces these 4 things seriously and critically, and then we restructure the government such that what should be done at local government level is done at local government level. What should be taxed at local government level is taxed at local government level. What should be done at state level is done at state level. What should be taxed at state level is taxed at state level. And what should be done at national level is done at national level. Similarly with taxation, that will also then eliminate multiple taxation, stress and distress that people go through. So the local government really needs to be strengthened. They should be part of the constitution and budget. We should know clearly what we want to do with the local government. Otherwise, you eradicate local government, you deal with state. Let's take state take its own responsibility for its local government. But we need to take government down to where the people are. There are many, many places in Nigeria totally ungoverned, not one touch of government. They don't even know that government exists. They just go about their jobs, doing whatever they can just to eke a living and survive. Nobody does that in this century. It's just unbearable and unfair, and so on and so forth. Even within metropolis and big cities, you find a lot of places that are like a jungle. Government doesn't go there. They don't have any idea what's going on in there. And therefore, you find that the strength of the Nigerian economy is not being able to be unleashed.
Touched hugely on corruption in your analysis and narratives. Stories abound in relation to that about, how manufacturers would rather not pay taxes and will, evade their responsibility in that regard. And the reasons are not far-fetched because of corrupt officials who would ask them, to pay their taxes to them because there is no evidence of tax payment in the first place, which is pretty much supports that view about the trust deficit, between government and, the citizens. So how can this also feature within that, tax review committee such that, reforms can be done in that regard to plug the leakages in tax collection system?
Really wants to pay tax everywhere in the world. Even in America and in Europe, people have tax havens, they have tax evasion, tax avoidance, blah, 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 and so on. So. And the reason why people don't want to pay tax is because everybody looks at tax as unfair, punitive, and so on and so forth. What a lot of governments, including the Nigerian government, has not been able to do is to sell to the people the benefits to them of paying tax. And the people don't see it also. Why would I pay tax when I look after my garbage myself, when I have borehole in my house, when I provide 2 generators to look after myself, when I clean my own streets? When I moved my church to where we were, I had to do the road by myself. I had to fix the road because there was no road there. And this is the second time I'm doing it. In Christchurch, we did the same. In this place, we did the same. And these are the challenges people face, and they do not want to pay tax. So the government has to change the narrative. Government has to be transparent. Government has to show people the benefits to them of paying tax. We wanted to fix a road recently, and I was telling all my neighbors, let's gather money together, let's fix this road so that we all can have an easy passage to our homes and to our offices. And they were ready to contribute because somebody went to them to sell an idea and a dream, and they were ready to be part of it. So government has to change the narrative and sell to the people the benefits to the people of paying tax. And then they themselves must be accountable. They must be transparent, and they must show the people that your 1 naira of tax, this is how we spent it, and not 1 kob of it escapes into graft or corruption. If government is able to do that consistently, you'll be surprised how people will be really, really willing to partner and cooperate with government and pay their taxes. There will still be 1 or 2 people who will dodge or evade. You can't avoid that. But that's where the law comes in.
All right.
That's where the law comes in.
Clearly a very interesting conversation. I was going to ask you, and I know you worked a lot with the Labour Party presidential candidate, and I was going to ask if this is significantly different from what he would have brought to the table. But we're totally out of time. Perhaps we'll pick this up another time. We'll be speaking with Pastor Itwa Egodalo, who a lot of people might not know this, is a chartered accountant, actually, and Deputy Chairman, SIO Professional Services. Thank you so much for your time on the program this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Right, so let's talk about what government uses taxpayers' money for, at least. We're joined by our correspondent, Olu Phillips, who is live at the Eco Bridge end of Lagos. The bridge is open now, as you can see. Olu, tell us what's going on there.
1 year, more than 1 year, this bridge, somewhere around here, was closed for more than 1 year, 4 months exactly. And what has happened is very simple. Human activity that is unabated, human activity that is not controlled, human activity that is not enforced in terms of having to get people off under the bridge. Now, let me tell you quickly what has happened before now. Some 1 year, 4.5 months ago, beneath this bridge, human activity and those who sell, make sales under the bridge, got the bridge burnt by way of their activities and their kiosk and all of that. And if you recall, the federal government has strict directives as regards having to trade under the bridges. And this is what has happened. As soon as that happened, the consequences are that for 1 year and 4 months, the major road into the island from the mainland was just the third mainland bridge, except you want to navigate through the Qatar Bridge area. And that was really very tough and difficult for people. But what have we seen? This bridge has been opened. We are yet to see commercial activities under the bridge completely leave. Just to my right here, you see kiosk and all of that, those still trading. It's a full-blown activity by the bridge. Human activities that are not supposed to be here, and this is what we have. And I should also tell you quickly that whilst this was on, just like 500 meters away, the Jada Bridge also got burnt owing to human activity. So you see this all over the state. People trading under the bridge. They've turned it to truck parks. They've turned it to all sorts of activity that isn't supporting the lifespan of these bridges. And guess what? When these things happen, no consequences. And the consequences in terms of monies is the taxpayers' money that have to go into this unnecessary expenditure and the pain that people have to go through this 1 year, 4 months that they had to wait. Kayode?
Well, I mean, I still see some people driving opposite traffic. But we'll have to thank you so much, Olu Phillips, our correspondent, bringing us live updates from the Eco Bridge end of Lagos.
That's pretty unmistakable, Kayode, driving against traffic. And we wonder if, the traders under that bridge, Akpongbo, will return. And this time, if they return, do they have fire extinguishers just in case of a reoccurrence, which we do not hope for,
Absolutely.
By the way.
But we have to run right now. Thank you so much for being a part of our show this morning. I'm Kayode Okikiolu.
And I'm Bukola Koka. Thank you for watching.
Amalpe Ogun Yusuf, wishing you a productive week ahead.
And I am Chamberlain Oso. Goodbye.